So, hey, so this is my first, episode. I don't know what you would really call it, and the truth of the matter is, I don't really know what this is myself yet. I just know that this is gonna be my first publication, and I do want to share with you guys. Um, I do, I do feel very compelled to share with you guys the Word of God and the Holy Bible, but I wanted to put this together for the people I have met on the street. To my family and friends, this may seem a little self-serving, and they'd be right to view it that way, but I've been writing for over a year now, and I just don't believe in my heart that it would be fair to share what I have written with others if they didn't have any insight as to what kind of man I am, where I came from, what I've been through. My path has been less than upright. I'm really excited, and I know for people that are close to me, they're kind of on pins and needles about, is this going to happen? Am I going to actually do this? Give my life to God, and it's true. It's happening. At the same time, am going to be on the streets. I want to I know how much I was suffering in my life, and I see people suffering on the streets, and I want to approach them, but I also know that in this world that trust has been completely destroyed. I am putting this out as my first publication because if I meet someone on the street, and if you're listening to this, more than likely I met you on the street, and that's because I want you to know who I am and what kind of man I am and where I came from before I start to share this word with you, because I want to create a trust between us, and I feel like this is the best way to do it. So here's the short and skinny version of my life. I never liked school growing up. It felt like a prison to me. Maybe that's the feeling that we all get when our mom or dad drops us off for the first time. When we realize our lives are no longer going to be spent playing in the front yard and snuggling, like that part of me never died. I remember that it was always a battle to get me to go to school, and I bounced between public and private Catholic schools my whole life. I remember one of my first teachers telling me that we were going to go to confession, which I don't. I feel like maybe everyone knows what confession is, but basically, if you don't know what it is, I'll just take you back to when I was a kid. I was supposed to go into this dark box with a grown man, and I was already telling them that this type of deal really wasn't for me. I remember saying, I'm not really I don't want to do that, but in some way I decided that, I was gonna go into the box because they were telling me, no, that's what you're gonna do. And so I entered the box, and I remember the man saying to me, he said, "Tell me, son, what are the worst things that you have ever done?" And without saying a word, I opened up the door and I yelled out, "I'm not going back in there, that's for sure." And I think my Nana was there at the time, and she was just completely turned red, couldn't believe the disruption that I was causing. I was never abused in the church. I know that gets thrown around a lot out there. Maybe it was because I was different and I had a loud mouth, but I stood tall, and I didn't see why I needed to be in the box. It didn't make sense to me. They were never able to give me any sort of explanation. I said, I'm not going back in the box. So, and that's probably why I bounced between private and public schools. But I was the type of kid that would stand up for what was right on the playground, no matter what. And this was particularly bad news for me. And the reason it was bad news for me is because I didn't grow until I was a junior in high school. So I was 5'2", and I sounded like a little girl up until pretty much my junior year of high school. So I was subject to many beatings and from classmates when I refused to compromise what I thought was wrong. And I just remember standing up for other kids and pretty much getting beaten all the time. And so school was just a terrible place for me. And in high school, I remember some of the rhetoric that was passed around too, and some of the things that they were teaching, I didn't feel like were congruent with reality. And one of those things was I remember my biology teacher when I was a sophomore. in high school saying that we came from monkeys, and I was sent to the hall. I actually laughed out loud, and I was sent to the hall, and was later informed that if I didn't answer the questions correctly, I would fail. And so I think I ended up making a C because I just remember reading the books and thinking this doesn't make any sense, and I didn't understand why this was being passed around because I always felt like, I guess for me, like I always felt like there was a God. I just didn't really think he wanted anything to do with me. I just thought he made a trillion planets and we're just space dust, and he doesn't care about me. I never thought that all of this came from nothing, but I just didn't really think God, was active in my life. And so once I graduated from high school, things really started to change for me. I attended 3 semesters at the University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma, and for some reason I had this idea that college was going to define my whole life. I made straight A's for the first time the whole time I was there, and that was the first time that I had ever made straight A's ever because I just did not want anything to do with school. But I thought, this is college. I've been told my whole life that college is the thing that will set you up for your life. But after about a year or so, I realized that I wasn't learning. What I was learning there was never going to help me. And the reason I say that is certainly not because I don't think college is a good thing. I do think college is a good thing. I certainly wouldn't want someone operating on my heart not to have studied the heart. But for me, I was good with people and I like to buy and sell things, and college just wasn't going to help me with that. So immediately upon leaving school, I got this medical job. I got this medical sales job. And I was good at it. I had more money than I knew what to do with, and I was 21. I bought my first house right across the street from OCU where my brother was going to school, and the party was on. Every weekend we probably had a couple hundred people over to the house, and there was just this constant party going on the weekends, and that was kind of what we did. But there was this huge emptiness in my heart, and I didn't know really how to feel it. I was 21, and so I came up with this bright idea. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could party 7 nights a week and I would be happy. And at this point, I had grown a foot and a half, and girls were paying attention to me for like the first time. And I was thinking, surely if I just party all the time and there's a ton of girls around, that will make me happy. And so surely that would fill this huge hole that's in my heart. So I'm thinking this is the way to do it. So what I did was I opened up a nightclub called Greenhouse in Oklahoma City, and it was a huge success. We had about 1,000 people show up from Thursday to Saturday, and I was making I was making money faster than they could print it, and there were beautiful women everywhere. But within the first year or two, I realized something very strange. I was never interested in buying anything. I I just remember I would go out and I would have this money, and I there was nothing that I wanted to buy. Like I had never had that much money, and but at the same time, even though I had it, I didn't know what to spend it on because I wasn't interested in buying anything. And I don't know if that's, what I can say is I'm an imperfect man, and as this story continues, you're gonna find out a lot about me that's wrong, and in the past the things that I've struggled with. But for me, money wasn't something that I really struggled with because even if I made a ton of it, there just wasn't anything that I wanted to buy. So most of the time, I just gave it to the people that were working for me, and I struggled mightily with a bunch of other things along the way. But I knew that money wasn't really gonna make me happy, and so I never really, money just wasn't something I knew. That's not to say I didn't go buy a car, which I did, and I felt really guilty for doing, and that was probably pretty much all I did. And I just I quickly figured out for me that money wasn't going to make me happy. It took me a little bit longer with other things like drinking and girls and that kind of thing, but I realized something very strange, and that was this. This was about 2 years into opening the nightclub. I was never interested in buying anything, and I always felt bad after a long weekend of drinking and promiscuity. And 2 years in, more money and more girls, and the hole in my heart began to grow and swallow me. And I couldn't figure it out. It was just, it was like I was self-destructed. I knew that if I continued to live my life like this, that I would destroy myself. So in my third year, I wrote a plan to stop womanizing and drinking. I was going to sell my bar at age 25, and my plan was to get some programmers from OU and create a mobile application, and we called it Mobile Gift. It was basically an idea that I had had that would allow users to send gift cards from their places, their favorite places from one phone to another. And I'm not going to bore you with all the details in between, but it was free to download and free for businesses to use. And we were going to make money through our sponsorships. And it was beginning to gain some serious steam in Oklahoma City. I met with the vice president of Anheuser-Busch, which, oddly enough, probably there was a sign there somewhere like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be doing business with beer people, but, they loved the app, and to be honest with you, even at this point in my life, I loved beer, and they wanted to sponsor it, and so they wrote a check of a considerable amount that would support the development for 2 years, and I buried myself in the work. Sometimes I put 20 hours a day into it. I remember sometimes just barely dozing off before I was back up and at it. Like it was just, I put myself in a complete fever because I had realized that money and women and these things weren't going to make me happy, but if I could just bury myself with enough work, maybe I could avoid in some way the realities of life, or maybe that would even make me happy. And I'll be honest with you, there were times when I got really high off of working, but it definitely didn't fill the hole. And once the app started to gain some steam, a company overseas contacted me and they said they wanted to invest more money than I have ever dreamed about, enough to fund the company for 5 years. And to me, this was my moment. I was finally going to make it, whatever that meant. This idea that had been planted in my head throughout the years that being a CEO or making money, was in some way valuable and notable and worthy, which are which is not correct, but this was my thoughts at the time. And I'll never forget the two men that I met with during those times. And I feel like there were things that happened now that I look back on it that I totally missed and didn't realize until about 7 years later what was actually going on. But both of them were financial ambassadors for a company that were wanting to invest overseas. And one of them said to me one time when we were going over the financial performance, he said, "Do you know what the golden rule is?" And I actually answered with, treat others as you want to be treated. And he said to me, he actually laughed in my face, and he said, "No, the man with the gold makes the rules. That's the golden rule." And something just did not sit right with me about that. And it's to this day, it bothers me when I replay it in my mind. Like it seems just wrong and not good. But I did what a coward would do, and I kept my mouth shut, and I went along with it. And the second time I remember I was obviously I was asking questions about this company. They're about to put a ton of money into my company, so I want to know who they are, where they're from, that kind of thing. And I didn't want to just be involved with anyone. I kind of felt a little bit bad after one of those first encounters I had where they asked me about the golden rule, and so this time I said, I put my whole soul into this project. I said, "What is it that you guys do exactly?" Which I think is a fair question to ask if somebody's about to invest in your company, And this was one of the first meetings that we had. He said to me, he said, "Well, do you know how you go to the nearest supercenter or grocery club and there is cheap Chinese garbage, piles of it as far as the eye can see?" And I responded with yes, because I found that to be completely congruent with my experience at those stores, which is there's just cheap Chinese stuff piled to the high as far as the eye can see. So I said yes. He said to me, "So, well, he said, well, where do you think all of those sweatshops in China get their materials? Commodities is what we do. He said, I'll put it to you this way. The Chinese buy from us like the US buys from China. And this was a Swiss company. This didn't sit well with me. There was something about it that just didn't seem right because I'm don't live under a rock, and I realize the atrocities that take place in Chinese labor and sweatshops where people are completely not paid fair wages, and they're abused to basically produce cheap Chinese made stuff. And so I kind of sat back and I thought, if like, what are the conditions of the people that are going into these mines that are mining these commodities? And speculation was all that it was in my own mind, but the whole thing just seemed not right. In that moment, I did what a coward would do, and I shut my mouth again. Um, I was just a few weeks away, maybe a week away from obtaining an investment that would make our app a household name, but that would put the contract, I was so close to obtaining this investment that I was willing to compromise a few little good parts of my heart just to obtain this investment. And then the contract came in, and this was the single greatest soul-crushing moment of my entire life. They wanted two things from me. They had never mentioned these two things in previous discussions, but they wanted to do two things, and those two things were this. They wanted to take a life insurance policy out on my head, and this way, if I were to die, they could be recompensated. And the second was, upon me perishing, all assets would be transferred to the lender. And what that means in layman's terms is, if you die, we get paid. When you die, we take everything. And this destroyed me. I mean, to put it simply, it completely, to just try and remember how I felt when I read through this, and after knowing how many hours and how many countless nights and tiresome days I spent putting into this project, I walked away. I walked. I walked away. I said, I'm shutting this thing down. And it was one of those moments that you hear about on TV, or maybe you have even experienced in your own life, where I felt like Satan was asking for me to sell my soul. And I couldn't do it. I was devastated. I hit a downward spiral at that time in my life, and the silver lining was that my programmers got recruited to work for the WWE app, which, if anyone's listening, if you know what WWE is, it's a pretty big deal, and they went on to have great careers, and so it wasn't, but for me personally, I was completely empty. See, I had always thought, I had always thought that if you loved the people around you and you were nice to them and you took care of them, that is how the world worked. And perhaps many people come to this realization much younger in life, but I can honestly tell you that I saw the world and all the people in it as completely good. And maybe not completely good, but mostly good until I was about 28 years old. I mean, I didn't realize that this type of thing existed. And matter of fact, one of my attorneys at the time said, well, them taking a life, policy out on your head really is kind of standard when you're doing a deal this big. And I was just like, what? Do not say this to me. What are you talking about? This is not at all right. Everything about it is wrong. It shouldn't even be written down. But I ended up walking on the deal, and then the drinking was back on for a while, and I had struggled with drinking my entire life, and I drank for a while and decided that I was just gonna pity myself and have a big pity party, and I did that. And once I sobered up, I had to really consider what were the most important things in my life. At this time, I still didn't believe in God. I mean, I believed a God possibly existed, but there was no relationship with me and God. And I had tried just about everything, but there was one thing in my life that was a beaming light of constant. And that was my only true love. I loved her the first day that I met her back in the OCU days, and somehow this woman, stunning, gifted, smart, and kind, still loved me. She literally watched me self-destruct into oblivion and prayed for me. She somehow was able to see the good in me, and I may never understand this because to that moment in my life there were not a lot of good parts to me, and it was a true gift that she wanted anything to do with me. And she had been finishing up her master's in Texas while I was trying to chase the bad guys down and throw my life away, basically. And she agreed to move back, and this was the greatest thing that had ever happened to me in this life. And she moved back to Oklahoma, and I started drawing up plans for my next business venture. In my mind, at this time, I figured if I was doing anything with her, my life would be perfect because she was everything to me, and she always was, and I was blind and couldn't see that, and now I could see that. So in my mind, I thought whatever we do, if we do it together, my life will be perfect, which I later found out was also not true. But I created a food truck called Mexi Dogs in Oklahoma City, and at this point, you're probably thinking that I'm completely either out of my mind or full of it, and how could I blame you? This story is a real roller coaster. But in the first 2 weeks of us being open, I kid you not, the Food Network called me and wanted to feature us on TV. And I even, and the thing is, in the show notes, you can see pictures of, the stuff. I'll post some pictures of Greenhouse and some pictures of, maybe the video of us on Food Network, so you know that I'm just not a completely out of my mind, compulsive liar. But I've done just about everything in this life. So, but anyway, along this time, when we were doing the food truck, I experienced like pretty much my first real death in the family, and that was my grandfather. And I took it really hard, and I think everybody probably takes it hard. I don't know, if there's different levels of that, but I know that it was a very sobering and upsetting and sad part of my life. And something happened on the day of his funeral that, when I look back on it, was just it's kind of interesting. My grandmother was in tears because she had locked everyone out of the house, and there was quite a bunch of people that were going to be coming over to her house after the, funeral. And I said, hey, I'll handle this. I said, I'll go over there and I'll make sure to get it unlocked before the funeral ends, and I'll take care of this. So I Googled a locksmith, and this guy shows up. I tell him the situation. I say, my grandfather passed away, and they're all coming over here, and basically I'm, missing his funeral. And he tells me he's very sorry. He says, I'll be able to get in very easily. Don't worry about that. And I'm not really sure how to explain it, but he had the lock open in about 5 seconds. It was almost like I didn't even see what he did. The door was open like he had the key or something. But anyway, the door just swings open then, and he looks at me and he says this, and I'll never forget it. He says, Travis, you should know something. Jesus Christ is watching you, and he wants you to show up. And then he said to me, I've struggled with addictions in my own life, and he has opened the door for me. And I was confused. I was like, what is this guy talking about? I did not believe in Jesus. And although I never believed that we came from monkeys, I didn't think that God wanted anything to do with me, and I brushed him off. I just thought that was a really random encounter, and it was something that kind of stuck out to me in my past. But back, I after the funeral and that was all finished, I went back to the food truck, and the food truck was booming. It was a huge success. People were calling us every day trying to book us. We were overbooked. It was, it was doing well, and we were doing it together. And I loved Davey, and so it was awesome. But there was a huge hole in my heart still. And I don't understand because I have plenty of money and the love of my life, but there was still something missing, a sorrow that I had that just was still there. And, for a year, David the locksmith would send me texts only about once a month, and only scripture. And each time I received a text from him, I couldn't deny what was being said to me, but I very cautiously and hesitantly began to listen to the Bible in my headphones a little bit. Not very often. And I still thought it was rubbish. Although there were moments when I would get a different feeling inside of me. And one thing I knew for sure was that I had to disconnect from society as much as possible. I was in a state of confusion that was unprecedented for me. And the reason why was because I wasn't making the most money that I'd ever made, but I was making plenty of it, and I was doing it with the love of my life, and we were serving other people and cooking for them, and that made me feel good. But the hole was still there, and I just thought, I'm doing everything right. Why is this hole still here? So I decided to start cutting some other things out of my life that I thought may, have been having effect on me. As I'm recording this, haven't been on Facebook for over 5 years. And that's not entirely true because I have logged in a couple times to buy or sell something on the marketplace, but I'm Facebookless. I've never had an Instagram. I don't do social media. And I guess that's kind of ironic because if I met you on the street and asked you to go to my website, that seems a little weird. But I didn't really like, Facebook, and I'm not going to get into the details on my thoughts of social media, but I sure will in the future. And it's a subject that I can't wait to talk about. But for as time is of the essence, I won't go in there today. But I remember disconnecting from the social media, and I just had this overwhelming desire that I didn't want to be in society anymore. I couldn't relate to what I was seeing in society. And so Davey and I went to go see this romantic movie called La La Land. And if you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it, but I remember it having a big impact on both of us. And I thought for a moment, just maybe, I could fill this hole in my heart if we liquidated all of our assets and bought an RV and traveled the country. And then that moment turned into a lifestyle. We sold everything and bought a Mini Winnie to test it out, and both of us enjoyed it so much that within the first year we traded the Mini Winnie in for a huge 40-foot diesel pusher RV, and we lived in an RV for 2 years. And then that little hole in my heart started to fill up. My relationship with God took a huge turn. And whenever you've been in the wild for almost 2 years, now keep in mind, we had jobs and I had to work during this time, and we had extended times where I worked remotely and she has complete summers off because she's a professor. And when you are when there's no TV in your life and there's no service and there's no phone, there's no face. When you have no service and you've got no Facebook and you've got no TV and screens are disappear from your life and you're out there in the wilderness in northern Montana and southern Canada and all the places that we went to, you start to see God everywhere. It's extremely apparent that there's a God. There was no doubt in my mind during this time that there was a God. There never was a moment in my life where I said there is no God, but the more time I spent out there, I realized just how much there is a God. And this inspired me. I decided that I was just going to start listening to the Bible, and I started asking myself for the first time, what if? What if God created all of this, and what if he wanted me to know him? you know, these are the thoughts you have when you're out there as a man in the wilderness with no phone and no anything else. And what and I so I thought so I started thinking these things for the first time. These thoughts just started coming in my head. What if God made all of this and really did want a relationship with me? And dare I say it, for the first time in my life, what if the Bible was true? Because I had denounced the Bible for 30 years. I said it was fake news. And this didn't come to me all in one moment, but I did start listening to the Bible on my headphones and reading it for the first time in my life with an open heart. And I say this because even during the times when David the locksmith was texting me out of the blue planting seeds, my heart was closed. And in this moment, I began to open up my heart to God and read the Bible and listen to the Bible, and it didn't take me very long to find the Bible verse that changed my entire life. The moment that Jesus Christ rung my noggin like a church bell, and I'm going to share that verse with you right now. And this is in 2 Timothy chapter 3, and this is the prophet Paul. He's writing about something that is going to take place in the future. And let me preface this by saying that about 1/3 of the Bible is about things that are going to happen. And so when Paul says this, he's writing this about the future. And this was the Bible verse that changed my life. It's 2 Timothy chapter 3. And it says this: "But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, denying God. Have nothing to do with such people." And I remember my eyes filling up with tears, like my whole face started to feel like I had just been punched in the face, and the tears filled up my eyes, and my heart stopped, like I had a small heart attack, or it's like maybe when your heart skips a few beats, or 5 beats, or 10 beats. But I felt like I was being crushed in like a trash compactor by something that I couldn't see. And you see, in that moment, I wasn't even sure what the end times even meant. But this is what I did know. And it says, lovers of themselves. Me. This was me. I literally saw someone taking a selfie as this was ringing in my ears. Lovers of money. Me. Boastful. Me. Proud. That's me. Abusive. Me. Disobedient to parents. Definitely me. Ungrateful. Me. Unholy. Pretty sure that's me. Without love. Okay. I wasn't totally finished. I did have some love in me. Unforgiving. I'm also not a grudger, so maybe there is some good in me yet. Slanderous. Me. And slanderous in a way that only the Lord and my wife know I repent for. My mouth was so filthy toothpaste didn't even do anything for me. Without self-control. Me. Matter of fact, if you Google image the words no self-control, I'm probably in the first few pictures. Brutal. That wasn't me. That's not one of those that describes me, but we're checking almost all the boxes here. Not lovers of good, me. Treacherous, I hope not, but probably. Rash, me. Conceited, me. Lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Oh, look again. That's me. Denying God. I was never an atheist, but I've told you. But to say that I went my whole life without denying God would be untrue. So here's this Bible verse ringing in my ears. I'm looking at this list, and I check almost every box. And if I tried hard enough, I probably could have checked every box if I searched real deep within myself. But here, what I see on this list is myself. And my eyes filled up with tears, and my heart stopped, and I felt like I was being crushed in a trash compactor. And it's like my entire mind and body was overwhelmed with fear. I mean, what had I done? How could I have become this which was predicted thousands of years ago? Was there any hope for me? I called my mom. I remember I was crying. I said, I just wanted to read something in the Bible that would make me feel like I wasn't just completely covered in sadness. And she said to me, she said, you should read Proverbs. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but anything was better than what I had just read. And my entire body was covered in this fear. Like, there were moments I thought my heart stopped. And I turned to Proverbs, and right there in front of me, Proverbs chapter 1. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but fools despise wisdom. This is not a coincidence. If you're hearing this, this is not a coincidence. There's 750,000 words in the Bible, and I go from paralyzed with fear to the next scripture telling me fear is the beginning of wisdom. It's not a coincidence for me. It's not a coincidence for you if you made it this far in this boring story that I've shared with you today, which is my life. The best part of this whole thing is that if you listen to my story today and you thought that it was good, then you're in for a real treat, because my story is dust when compared to what I'm about to start putting out on this channel. The story of our Creator and our Savior is the bee's knees. I don't know if people still say that, but it's the best thing going. And like I've said, if you're here, this is no coincidence. I love you. Yes, if you're listening, I love you. If I met you on the street, I love you. I'm sure that there are plenty of people who know more about the Bible than I do. But the thing is, nothing brings me joy in this world other than sharing with you the things that I do know and the things that I've learned and the pitfalls that I've taken in my own life as an imperfect, human being. And I'm going to take this moment in Jesus' name to thank you for allowing me to walk today. Thank you for allowing me to breathe air and share this testimony with the people that may be suffering just like I was for so many years, God. May you bring peace to us who look for you. Let us rejoice in your name, Yeshua, that's Jesus. Amen. And we will see you guys next week, and the story will be much better than it was today. I love you. God bless.